I've been out with Ben a couple of times.
Yeah.
I'm super psyched, but the avalanche thing's worrying me. I don't know anything. What do I need to know?
Well, it's good to be worried.
Okay.
You know, people do die in avalanches in Scotland, and I think a lot of people just assume that it's some phenomena of the Greater Ranges, and we've just got quite low hills here in Scotland, and it doesn't happen. But every year, people get taken down by avalanches,
Yeah.
and in some seasons, we actually do get people who die in avalanches. So it is super important to learn about it. So
I don't want to die.
that's a good plan, not to die. Yeah, and I would say that, like, you know, get some knowledge, and we're going to have a chat through a bit now, but also it's not going to stop you going out, the whole avalanche thing. It's just maybe going to modify your route.
Maybe
and you're
where
going
I go.
Yeah, where you go, and choose some sensible routes. You know, it's never going to stop you going out in Scotland. It's just going to change perhaps whether you go on a ridge or a gully line, and
Right.
so I think it's really important that, you know, it doesn't put people off. It's all about, you know, learning the skills and making some sensible decisions.
Teach me the skills.
So the go-to place is the Scottish Avalanche Information Service, and we currently forecast for 6 different areas. So if you click on the homepage on the website, this is what you see. It's the areas that are basically most popularly visited by hill walkers and climbers in Scotland, and
Most likely where I'm going to go.
yeah, exactly. It's where the big interest in mountains are, not exclusively, but they try and cover as much relevant area as possible. And each day, a forecaster is going out on the hill and observing conditions, looking at the weather report for the following day, and then putting out a forecast for me and you to use and make our decisions about.
That's really handy.
Yeah, so this is what it looks like on the homepage, and it's colour-coded to represent the risk,
Okay.
which we will look at shortly. So everything needs to be set in context with this kind of decision-making process, so how we learn how to use these avalanche reports. And we've got something called Be Avalanche Aware, and there's leaflets here about it, which you can get hold of from various stores and outdoor centres and things, and also through Mountaineering Scotland.
Right.
And this is the kind of education process that we use to help people make their decisions. And we've got 3 areas here, and we're here at the moment in the planning stage, so that's you and me sitting having a blether whilst we're planning our route for the day. But obviously the decision making doesn't stop there. You know, we want to continue throughout the journey, and also continue if we get to what we call a key place. Now, I know Ben mentioned a key place to you about where you might turn round. A key place might be just before you commit to the slopes to start your climb, or dropping off the top of a Munro down some steeper ground. So,
So changing my plan if the weather's not, or the conditions aren't what I thought they were.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, your plans can never be set in stone in winter, because there's too many variables that are just outside our control, basically. You know, the weather might change from the forecast, and definitely the underfoot conditions might be very different to what you expect. So there's the 3 distinct stages, and within that we need to consider 3 things. One is the weather, which is shown as the little icon as the snowflake here.
Yep.
One is us, and that's a really important, you know, how we interact with the world around us. And the other is the mountain environment and the journey that we hope to do, and that goes through each of those 3 planning stages. And overshadowed by this is the thought that, you know, statistically, 90% of people involved in avalanches in Scotland, they actually trigger them. So if you and me, if we're going to be involved in an avalanche, it's going to be us who actually trigger them. There you go.
And this is why I need to learn.
Yeah.
I don't want to trigger one.
Yeah. The only other context that would be, it might be you're innocently at the bottom of a slope somewhere, and it's actually people above you who trigger the avalanche. So when I'm in terrain where there's steep ground above and there's people, then I'm always very focused on that, thinking, you know, what if, you know, what's going on up there, and could it potentially affect me? So that's a big headline figure, that, isn't it? 90%.
That's scary.
Pretty significant.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So each forecast area has a colour-coded hazard scale, and this is the scale that's currently in use. And obviously we've got green at the bottom, where human-triggered avalanches are unlikely but not impossible. And it goes through from moderate in yellow, where human-triggered avalanches are possible, considerable, human-triggered avalanches are likely, and then into the high where, natural avalanches and human-triggered avalanches could occur. So I like to think about this hazard scale as like just getting rid of that black. It's not relevant to us here in a Scottish context.
Okay. So that makes the considerable a lot higher then. Like that's way riskier now.
Yeah,
Okay.
It puts it in like that top half of risk, doesn't it? Which I think is a really sensible way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Because if you look statistically, most people who are involved in avalanches and definitely fatalities, then they occur on a slope that is forecast to be a considerable risk.
Right.
So for me, considerable is like, whoa, big red flag. I'm going to make some really good calls here before I commit to that.
Yeah. Because that gives you a false sense of security, thinking it's just amber, but that's where people are more common to get into accidents then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I think we're all if something's red, we're like, whoa, stop.
Yeah.
But amber, we're all a bit of amber gambler on the traffic lights, aren't we? Yeah. So perhaps that mentality is carried forward into sort of the decision making on the hill as well.
Okay. So we're going to avoid orange.
Well, not necessarily avoid, but certainly make some really cautious decisions if it's marked as orange, as considerable. But needs to also include some learning about this as well, because if the slope's marked orange and it's pretty flat slope, then it ain't going to avalanche, so it isn't going to be shown as orange. We need to have it at the right altitude. What's altitude?
So that's how high up the hill you are.
Yeah, and how do you find that information from
looking at maps, looking at the contour lines on the maps, that tells you how high you are.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And aspect, that's a bit more of a technical word, isn't it?
That's kind of what direction the face is.
Yeah, which way the slope actually faces.
Yeah.
And then angle is pretty key. Have you ever heard the sort of average angle that avalanches are likely to occur?
No, I don't.
No? So 35 to 45 degrees.
Okay.
Yeah, or 30 to 45 degrees. I think the likeliest angle of avalanche is 38 degrees. So 30 to 45 is the kind of window where we are likely to trigger an avalanche.
How can we work that out on a map?
Well, I've got that on one of these slides actually.
Awesome.
So,
Awesome.
Stem your rush, boys. Stem your rush. Yeah. So this is a compass rose that we'll get on the forecast. We get that and a lot of written information which we will look at in another video. But the basic compass rose here, if we think about that as a conical mountain, the height in the middle is the height in meters above sea level at the highest point in the area. So that is the summit of Ben Macdui. And then we've got the 1,000 meter contour highlighted. It's a bit like on your maps, and the 800 meter contour. So thinking about the risk here, which slopes are presenting the greatest risk there for you?
This north to east slope.
Yeah. Above what height
Above
is the
1,000
highest
meters.
risk? Yeah, but it would have to be steep enough to be of issue.
Of course.
So really important for us to learn how to superimpose that information onto our map so we can plan where to go.
Okay.
And this is how we do it. So we've got our map of Cairngorm, we've got it orientated to north, and we've got our compass rose orientated to north. So I can now superimpose that on slopes where I definitely don't want to be. So these slopes face in an easterly aspect and they're high, they're right into the 1,000 meters, so definitely would want to avoid that. But on the other side of this ridge line, it faces which way?
That faces west.
Yeah, so that would actually be relatively safe. It's probably pretty wind scoured, which means that the ridge line could well be scoured. I often think of ridges, of bridges, like islands of safety.
Okay, I see,
Yeah, so if I'm not sure, with the avalanche risk,
stick to a ridge.
Stick to a ridge line. If I'm up here and it's going pear-shaped, I wouldn't want to be dropping down into a steep corrie head wall. I'd want to stick to the crest of the ridges. And you can see here where there's lots of tightly packed contours, even though it's below 1,000 meters, then we're definitely in that kind of moderate where we could potentially trigger an avalanche. So when I'm learning, I actually cut this rose out from the forecast and I stick it in the corner of my map there, put it in my map case, and then it helps me remember where I shouldn't be.
I like it. You're clever.
Yeah. Well, sort of. So that's a really nice example. That's a typical Scottish scene. This is up on a Munro near Ben Aldrin. You can see how it's very wind scoured. on one side, and all the snow's been ripped off there and dumped on the leeward side. So walking along the crest is a really safe place to be, or on the wind-scoured side. But over here could be a very different story, and you could...
This is the avalanche risk here.
Yeah, on the leeward side of the mountain. Yeah. And you asked earlier about how do you know how steep it is. We can do some practical things on the hill to help us, and there's also an app which we'll look at as well later on. But from the planning stage, using our map, we've got something called index contours on the map, which is on these Ordnance Survey maps every 50 metres. And if we're on a 1 to 50,000 scale, if you have 2 millimetres gap between the index contours, that puts you onto a 30-degree angle slope.
Right, okay.
And 30-degree angle slope, good or bad?
That's getting into the bad.
That's definitely,
towards the bad.
Yeah, towards the bad. And there's another phenomena that you can think about as well. We should have 4 little skinny lines between those index contours, but when it gets steep, the cartographers literally just miss them out. So can you see here, there's only 2.
Yeah.
So a nice rule of thumb, if there's missing contours, you're definitely into a slope that's steep enough to avalanche. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's for the 1 to 50,000 scale. Some people use 1 to 25,000, and that's 4 mils between. So if it's 2 mils between and you can just measure on your compass, then you're into an avalanche potential slope. So in your planning stage, you can avoid those steep contours and go on to something that's a bit more relaxed.
A little bit easier angle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Man, Heather, my head is minced. That's a lot of information.
That is.
Where can I learn more?
Well, the Scottish Avalanche Information Service website has an awful lot more than just the daily forecasts on it. So on the right-hand side, you can see these blogs.
Okay.
And that's a really useful source of information because the forecasters are taking photographs when they're out and kind of making general comments about what they see. So I definitely look at those blogs in my planning stage. And then if we just look further down the page there, at the bottom here, this Be Avalanche Aware section is really, really useful, and a lot of the terminology and the icons and things that are used on the forecast is explained there. So a bit of homework for you, Robert.
I'm not very good with homework.
Some people are much better learners by actually physically going on a course with an expert. So here at Mountaineering in Scotland, we run a whole raft of winter courses, and one of them is aimed specifically at a whole day of avalanche awareness. So there's a little bit of theory for about an hour in the morning, and then we're out on the hill for the rest of the day, actually sticking our noses into these steep slopes and learning how to make some sensible decisions to avoid getting involved in an avalanche situation.
Brilliant. I'm going to check that out.
Sign up, mate.
Let's do it.
Yeah.